Welcome to the Time of the Reason podcast show. We're not looking for ratings. We are not here to support and to create sensationalism. We are not here to entertain. We are here to give due diligence to the pressing human, economic, environmental, political, and social issues that affect humankind. We are here to promote thinking. Now, more than ever, is the time to revive reason. Unless we do so, humankind is riding a one-way runaway train into oblivion. Think about it. We must think. Thank you for listening again to another episode of the Time of the Reason podcast show. Let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Time of the Reason podcast show. I'm here once again with my partner in crime and in inspirational conversation, Dan Ploger. Today we have a really interesting subject. Well, maybe not so interesting. It's something that's been debated for quite a long time now. Man and the role of man and what masculinity means. And it's something that has been debated for quite a long time. There are stereotypes that go along with that and a lot of answers to what men are and how they should conduct themselves in society. And even more so today, I have to tell you, we have seen, I was raised that there were two genders. Most people were raised that way. But in the last few years, seems like there's more than two genders, that you can basically identify with whatever gender you want, regardless of what biology says, and science and common sense and logic and reason and critical thinking and all the things that point us in the right direction. So here we are. We're going to discuss the new masculine and conquer thyself first, which may be a solution or probably is. But let's get started. The role of man throughout history, it seems like mankind, humankind have been engaged in bloody conflicts, sometimes for centuries, especially during the Dark Ages, but they were always about control and power over resources and people. We've heard the term toxic masculinity. Well, we have another thought on that, don't we, Dan, about what toxic masculinity really is and how it's actually helped us. So let's just start there. Let's start about the role of man and what masculinity meant then and what it means today. And is it new? I don't know. Let's see. So what was the role of man, Dan, at the very beginning?
Well, if we look at our biological history and look at man's development as an anthropological evolution, in the beginning, the woman's role is obvious. That's clear to most people, except our Supreme Court justice, is that that women were to raise, care for, and nurture the children, because humans are an awful species in terms of the time it takes for us to develop. It takes, for most animals, a gestation period of somewhere between 6 and 12 months, depending on the species. But then the animal's once it's born, the baby is pretty much free to walk and initiate and respond to life challenges on its own. Humans, on the other hand, are a unique breed because it takes us not only 9 months in the womb, but as we all know, it takes 2 years until we can even remove diapers, till we've learned to control that basic function. And ultimately, it's still, I think history will show that it takes a full 18 years for people to develop. So the role of the female, the nurturing female, and managing and caring for the family is far from a minor one. It's one that actually will consume a good part of a lifetime. So the role of man in the past, while the woman was sent to care for the infants, was to basically provide an insurance policy to provide protection for the family against outside forces. And this is a role that was traditionally, has been traditionally assumed by the men. And I guess for a long period of development of humanity, that was the sole purpose of the male, is to guard and safeguard the female and the family. Well,
So I mean, certainly think about that. So we're living in a cave, you know, or stone structure, and men were to protect and nurture the family unit, and then I'm, you know, just and then that would go to maybe a village. The men would be the protectors of the village or the tribe, and then it would branch out maybe to a city or a region, then a country. That's kind of how it went throughout history. If I'm reading that correctly, it was up to the men. You didn't see a lot of Amazons running around protecting the village.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was a male role.
right. And I think that female matriarchal societies that have existed in the Amazon and elsewhere really weren't very successful. Um, and for good reason. If the women are tied up to raising their young for 19 years of their lives, well, and you have 6 kids spread out over another 10 years, you're talking about a 30-year obligation that a woman is signed up for. A man, on the other hand, what does he do? Well, he's got to provide. He goes out and he will hunt and catch and provide food, and he will also provide uh, protection against outside threats. And this function is one that maybe made more sense in the Stone Age than it does today, because we've got laws to protect us. We've got a lot of things that are in place as a society that don't require us to go out with a club and beat the shit out of our next door neighbor. So, um, so the roles, there's been a change in that the male role has become less and less necessary. Although you can, like any insurance policy, you can always argue, should I go without insurance or should I go with insurance? So that's always a question that will remain. But there's a new anthropological threat to humanity and to the family unit that's evolved and maybe taken the place of the need for physical protection. And that is the need to understand, clarify, interpret information, and to separate misinformation from true information, truth from false, and be the one to critically think their way through a situation and eliminate or reduce the amount of misinformation that can be horribly misleading, obviously, to anybody that's taken in by it. So I see this as kind of a new role for the masculine, the one to disseminate truth from fiction. And in the upcoming ages with AI, with things such as deep fakes, it's going to require quite a skill to be able to discern false information from truth. And I think this is will become a full-time job for anyone, but a particularly well-suited job for the masculine to be the one in the family, to protect against the evils and the effects of misinformation, malinformation, disinformation.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I almost see a dual track here for men in the 21st century. You know, whereas history has shown us that man operated with a mentality of like power over others. And then, like you just described, that we don't really have the threats. Humans don't have the threats like they did 200 years ago, or 400 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years before Christ. And so it's evolved. And so here we are in this digital age where societies are bombarded 24/7 with that type of information. So I think that when we there's a nexus there, or there's a step off point where men need to quit exhibiting power over others, which involves many times manipulation, outright brutality, like we just witnessed on October 7th in the Middle East, corruption, all of these things that men do and engage in for this power and control. Well, read the quote behind me. If you do not conquer self, you will be conquered by self. Napoleon Bonaparte, who was this French general and emperor who had amazing skills on the battlefield, but he was also very intuitive. And so I think that the nexus for that step off point to start critically thinking begins with the search to develop a power from within. And I think that men that exhibit true courage, this is just an opinion, but are guys that can look at themselves in the mirror. They can identify their weaknesses and they're aware of them. But more so, they can identify their strengths. And it doesn't always have to be manipulation and corruption. There's other strengths that men possess that can lead them into the protectorate world of misinformation and disinformation and malinformation. There's something there, but it does. It takes brutal honesty, it takes brutal humility, and then it takes a conscious effort to improve the strengths of each of us as individuals to move forward on a mission to remain protectors of society, but to do it in a different way where we're not exercising this force over others. Does any of that make sense, Dan?
Yeah, it sure does, John. Men have a lot of unique characteristics that are unique to the masculine and not to the feminine, such as industriousness, conscientiousness, and certain aspects of conscientiousness. It's men in society that keep the electrical power companies running, that keep the natural gas flowing, that keep the trucks running, and that's just a natural function. And I don't want to get into this. It doesn't really matter to me whether it's the man of the family or the woman of the family performs this information filtering objective. It doesn't matter to me, but it's something that needs to be done. And humankind desperately is being faced with a situation where the evil forces of nature have realized that they have power over information and that it's almost free to disseminate information. And therefore, there's so much bad information out there. And the only thing we can to advance that anybody can use to advance has to be the truth. It can't be some filtered version of interpretation of humanity or something. We are information. We are all we can do is respond to information that has value, that is truthful, and to discern what information is truthful and what isn't is something that nature hasn't provided man with, and we better come up with it in a hurry because we're really going to be faced with it. Look at what has happened to the mainstream media, that they've realized they could be propaganda machines, and that's what they've become. The New York Times is no longer anything but a propaganda rag, and no different than the Inquirer, probably less news value than the Inquirer, in fact. So this is a thing that mankind is faced with. Mankind has never faced before, and mankind better figure out some way to tackle this. And it just so happens that the male is uniquely, in many ways, uniquely good at this function. So at critical thinking, at problem solving, these are the strengths of the masculine. And we need to put those strengths to the test. And we need to put those strengths to the test so that humankind can survive, because without it, we're left with tyranny and propaganda.
Yeah, you've raised a lot of interesting points. And you're right, Dan. If you just look around at the world today, and men have been primarily in charge of everything for a long, long time. And look at the state of where we're at, conflicts. And, it seems like, what is it in the Bible? Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. All of this has been done before. But I hear what you're saying in this age of information that mankind has never been faced with. And now the tools, these technological tools, are now being utilized in a way for what men do best, exercise power over others. Well, there's got to be a shift. There has to be, if humankind is going to not only survive, but thrive. And it's going to start with the individual men who are going to have to, we talked a second ago about, have to be aware of their weaknesses. They're going to have to develop their strengths. They're going to have to exhibit integrity. They're going to have to build trust with the people that they are around. And then they're going to have to show true courage, which to me boils down always doing the right thing. We used to say it's the golden rule. Remember the golden rules? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And we're not seeing very much of that golden rule exercised anymore. So true courage is when people aren't looking and you have an opportunity to do something that may be wrong, but you don't do it. That's called integrity. That's called true courage. So the man that conquers those desires to exercise corruption, to exercise manipulation for personal gain, to exercise brutality, maybe the guy has to think twice. And maybe the real Spartans are the guys that unsheath the sword last. Maybe the guys that use their critical thinking skills and have an earnest desire to improve themselves first. I mean, we could cite thousands of examples of men who who don't have control over who they are. They haven't conquered themselves, and they go about their business doing the same stuff that men have been doing for centuries, and they end up, not always, but they end up in a date with karma. And that's a whole other topic we could get into. But maybe it's time for the new masculine to embrace karma, the kind of karma that you get when you do the right thing. I would be really interested to see what guys like Napoleon Bonaparte would think about what's going on today. George S. Patton. How would these guys react to what we're witnessing every day? I mean, it would be astounding to see what these guys would be up to. But again, people of great character, they blossom.
Well, somebody like Napoleon and generals like him uh, have understood the critical nature of truthful information, because that's what wins or loses battles, is the intelligence about the enemy. And the fact, if that intelligence is not accurate, they're going to, a general's going to walk into a trap. So listen to a general. Their life depends upon solid information.
And that's what, gosh, great point, Dan, because I know you were actually the son of a general, and I know the conversations we've had. He didn't steer you the wrong way. He wanted you to be able to decide for yourself right from wrong and to do things in an integral way. And kudos to your dad and my dad as well. He was an Army officer. He was a field grade guy, and I'm just so grateful that he was able to work on my psyche and separate what's right from what's wrong. And I didn't always pass his muster, but when I did, he may not have always showed it, but when he did, I know that from the feeling I got inside and how I witnessed him, that he was proud of me. And guys don't necessarily tell their sons how proud they are, but maybe it takes a strong man to tell their son how proud they are of them. Maybe that's part of the new masculine. Maybe we can show our feminine side and do it in a way that's not stereotyped and the things that they try to do people today for doing the right thing. my gosh, Dan, you do the right thing today, you get censored, you get canceled, you get ridiculed. You have people show up your house and point fingers, some of these Supreme Court justices. And it's just, it's an amazing world in which we live in, but we have opportunities. Men, we have real opportunities to turn this around. And I believe that if we work on conquering ourselves first and we tend to do the right thing, maybe all this will wrinkle itself out. What say ye, Dan?
Well, I think this is a problem that, as we've talked about, as the more I've studied this subject, the more I realize that it's all about information. We, in a sense, are codes. We're information. Somewhere there's some information that defines you, defines me, and so we're just bits of information. And if somebody is throwing bits of information that are intended to deceive you, and you become deceived, shame on you. What's the role of the future victim? Interesting question. Maybe the future victims need to stand up and become critical thinkers and stand up and oppose the forces that try and define you into victimhood.
Yeah, interesting point. Now that I'm thinking we're talking on the subjects of generals, some of the generals that I've witnessed the past couple of years, General Milley, who have fallen into this DEI racism narrative, and for some reason they've jumped on the bandwagon, and how can you trust a general who believes that diversity, equity, and inclusion and a fighting force is going to win the day? I mean, if anything, it's going to dilute the power and the strength of your fighting force, and it's going to make you weaker than if you just did the right thing. And General Milley, do the right thing. Give us the right information. That's all we're asking. And all the other men out there that have fallen prey to these narratives and they're giving out bits and pieces of misinformation for whatever reason, doesn't matter. Be a leader. And it starts with being a leader of yourself first. That's about it. And I can say these things because I'm a civilian and I live in the United States. And the founding fathers had a faith in the human spirit, but they also wrote down or created a constitution that allows human beings the God-given right to have freedom of speech. And I'm quite honestly sick of what we're witnessing in America and globally. It's not just in America. This Marxist push to take away our rights and our freedoms, it's time to conquer ourselves, and then let's go conquer this evil that's taken over the planet.
Right.
Any
right.
advice, Dan?
Well, I think that that's something that mankind's going to have to adjust to. Otherwise, he'll become extinct. If he doesn't adjust to this, AI will take over and man will become obsolete. So it's critically important that humanity has some purposes here and some obligations it has to rise up to. And that's you and that's me, John. We have to have the strength and the courage and the intellect to recognize bad information from good information.
Great point and well said. And I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate all the people listening. And just think about this for a second. In a thriving human society, there are only two genders. And if we keep playing it the way we do, the only place where two genders exists or doesn't exist is in a world without humans. Think about that for a second.
Yes,
I'll leave you with that. Good seeing you, Dan. Happy New Year, and thanks again for listening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Time of the Reason podcast show. Now it's time to think. Logic and reason work. It's only common sense. Do your part.